What China wants is for the United States, stop bullying us. China's surrounded by U.S. military forces in Japan, in Korea, in the Philippines, throughout Southeast Asia. We would be honest to also say, look at how our country as a whole have gained. How many companies have found huge markets in China? How many companies produce in China? How many companies are engaged with China in supply chains? That's what honesty would be. We don't have it in our politics.
This is Jeffrey Sachs, an American economist who has emerged as one of the most rational voices in the United States on global affairs. Professor Sachs isn't afraid to speak the truth about the US government's involvement in numerous conflicts around the world. And in today's video, I sit down with a professor to talk about the future of the most important geopolitical relationship in the world, the US and China. All eyes are on these two countries, especially since Donald Trump will return to the White House this January. Trump has vowed to make America great again and bring back jobs to the United States by imposing 60% tariffs on Chinese products. But will this strategy actually work? What about Donald Trump's new cabinet picks, many of whom are war hawks and neocons? How will they influence the public's perception of China? Unfortunately, the American public has been brainwashed to believe that China is the greatest threat to the future of the United States, but Professor Sachs reveals why this is completely false.
China's no threat at all to American democracy, and it's no threat at all to American security. China is not going to war with the United States. Chinese society has its kids in American schools. They like America. There's no animosity.
The truth is, the majority of Americans simply don't understand China, and it's why we should listen to the wise words of Jeffrey Sachs, someone who has been traveling to China for over 4 decades. In today's episode, we discuss the biggest misconception Westerners have about China, the one thing that China has done to make the United States extremely jealous, why Taiwan remains the cornerstone of a successful US-China relationship, and finally, the truth of the US-China trade war. If you want to understand China in 2025, this is the video for you. Let's begin. I want to talk about China because, for many years now, we have heard that China is the greatest threat to American democracy. China is the greatest rival. It's the greatest threat. Everything is China, China, China. What is the biggest misconception that Americans have about China?
First of all, China's no threat at all to American democracy, and it's no threat at all to American security. China is not going to war with the United States. China could not defeat the United States. Chinese society has its kids in American schools. They like America. There's no animosity. What China has done that has so made the United States crazy is that China's been successful. That's all. There's nothing more to it. I've been going to China now for 43 years, many times a year, many of these years. And I've watched China grow from poverty to success. They have worked hard. Sometimes you would actually go down a road and see construction work going on at midnight because it's round the clock, 7 days a week, 24/7, because China worked really hard to pull itself out of poverty.
Right.
China does it. First of all, it could never win a war or defeat the United States. The whole idea is preposterous. China can't project power across the Pacific. Right. The only thing China could do is have a nuclear war with the United States in which the whole world ends. There's no way that China can defeat the United States. So the whole idea is nuts. Second, there's no even the slightest indication that China wants to do that.
Right.
What China wants is for the United States, stop bullying us. China's surrounded by U.S. military forces in Japan, in Korea, in the Philippines, throughout Southeast Asia. China is vulnerable to the U.S. putting so-called chokeholds on China's sea lanes, because China depends on the South China Sea, the narrow straits of Malacca, which is in Southeast Asia in the Indian Ocean. And the United States talks openly about these being choke points.
Right.
We could stop the flow of energy to China. We could stop the flow of food imports to China. And the United States, of course, is playing the Taiwan card. Taiwan is a part of China. Interestingly, the Taiwanese say so. The Republic of Taiwan says so. The People's Republic of China says so. They disagree about who should run the place because they had a civil war going back to the 1940s. But both of them said, yes, this is one China.
Right.
And when we recognize China, the People's Republic of China, we adopt the one China policy. But what does the United States do? It's sending billions of dollars of weapons to Taiwan now. Can you imagine if China said, we're going to arm the state of Tennessee? And the United States says, no, please don't do that. That's part of the United States. No, we're going to arm the state of Tennessee because they like us. Maybe someday, who knows, they'll be an ally of ours and so forth. We have a really important company in Tennessee. This is what we're doing.
Right.
It's crazy. By the way, it's crazy for Taiwan to fall into this. My advice to Taiwan is don't become the next Ukraine. In other words, the next place of a war between superpowers that takes place on your territory. By the way, I said to the Ukrainians, don't become the next Afghanistan. I've seen this movie too often. And I told the Ukrainians, you will be destroyed, not by Russia, but by the United States. They will tell you, fight on, fight on, fight on. And I often quote Henry Kissinger's quip when he said, to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, but to be a friend of the United States is fatal. And this is applying to Ukraine, but I say it to my friends in Taiwan. Don't play games.
Right.
Don't play games. Don't think the United States is going to be able to save you. It's no way. But it could destroy you if a war breaks out. And so don't take weapons from the U.S. That's not how to get security. That's how to end up in a war.
Right. How do you feel with this rising rhetoric from the U.S. government that is saying, for example, a lot of very hardcore Republicans have said, we need to shift away from strategic ambiguity, shift to strategic clarity. Do you feel that that is just immediately provocation? I mean, is that really going to be the result of, the start of this next war?
Well, if they say, yes, we're going to defend Taiwan in a war, and then the Taiwanese would be so completely reckless and naive as to declare independence, which some probably would want to do, that's a great, brilliant way to start World War III.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, it's unbelievable how irresponsible people in Washington are, especially Congress, but not just Congress. We're seeing it everywhere. Talk of war as if it's nothing. What a game. Against a nuclear superpower with 4 times our population in their neighborhood, after all. When everyone knows, by the way, what's an aircraft carrier going to do chugging along in the ocean when China has hypersonic missiles? Well, everyone knows that this makes no sense at all. But the bravado, the recklessness of it is absolutely stunning. And we see all over the place, like in the New York Times, a recent story about the U.S. preparing for war with China. Are you kidding? Mm-hmm. And that story didn't question it at all. I would say it's insane, this whole concept. Then we have the U.S. Navy putting out its plans, saying we have to be ready for war with China by 2027. Oh my God, are there any adults anywhere left? Right. Is this are they playing Risk? Are they playing some video game?
Right.
Or are they just playing with our lives with abandon?
Professor Sachs, I think we have, a lot of unqualified people that just don't have that extensive knowledge about China. And it's interesting because they're certainly going down this road of manufacturing consent, right? Every day, China's presented in a very negative light in our media. it's very different when you're on the ground. I mean, you've been going for 43 years. You've seen better than anybody that amazing transition that China's done. But also, I think when you look at it from an economic perspective, our economies are just so intertwined. And this is something I constantly say is, our American economy, our American way of life really depends on China. And I think when you talk to more people, businessmen that really understand how the world works, I think you get a much different take on China. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And our economy depends on China. Their economy depends on us, not to every dollar or yuan, but for our prosperity. This has been a tremendously beneficial two-way trade.
Right.
By the way, the first principle of international economics, which I have taught for 44 years, is mutual gain. Yes. Trade is not about one side winning and the other side losing. That's how generals think. But economists say trade is about mutual gain. We get something, you get something.
Correct.
And the United States has overall been enriched by China's rise. Now, what's true also about trade is that there are losers from trade in the first instance, in the sense that if you're in a factory competing directly with a highly efficient, low-cost Chinese exporter who's able to encroach in your market, yeah, you may lose. You may lose your job, your wage may go down, and so forth. 2 points about that. One, somewhere else in the United States, there's a huge winner. There's someone who's exporting to China. There's all of us as consumers, because we're able to get our Apple phones or just about anything else that we have that has efficient Chinese production in it. So we're winning that way. Our standard of life and our quality of life has gone up. Now, the principle of international trade is that the winners win more than the losers lose, because there's a net gain for both societies. But what is also true is if our society is really stingy, so the winners pocket their winning and the losers are left in their own, you're going to have a disgruntled people in the losing areas. And in our case, in the United States, the U.S. overall has been a huge beneficiary of trade with China. And by the way, I said this in California recently, and they were very surprised to hear this because no one talks like that.
Right.
I said, are you kidding? You've been enriched. You're the IT center of the world, but you don't produce things. China produces your goods and gives incredible profits to your design, like NVIDIA, of course. There are some losers, and they turn out to be the swing states right now. So Trump in 2016 ran on this anti-China mode and carried some Midwestern states. And the Democrats, not being very creative, very honest, very smart in general, that's true of both our political parties, they said, oh, well, Trump did that, we better follow the same. So Biden became protectionist the same way. And nobody explained basic truths to the American people. Trade is good, but, people that are hurting should be helped with retraining, with new education, with the new job startups, with other things that a normal government would do, not just leaving people to scramble with their own devices. But we don't talk about any of that. We just fake it, saying, well, the only thing about China is that some people in Ohio lost their jobs. What about all the rest of the country? Even people in Ohio. So if we were a little less cruel to those who suffer an adverse consequence, say, from import competition, we would be honest to also say, look at how our country as a whole have gained. How many companies have found huge markets in China? How many companies produce in China? How many companies are engaged with China in supply chains? That's what honesty would be. We don't have it in our politics.
Yeah. Professor Sachs, thank you so much. I have one last question. As we look toward to 2025 and we see multiple conflicts around the world, are you optimistic that the world is going to be better a year or two from now? Are you worried about the future? What is your personal feelings towards the future of our world?
Well, I'm hugely worried. I'm hugely worried about escalation of war. I'm hugely worried about this constant drumbeat of war. I'm hugely worried about the lies that are told about why these wars exist. Oh, well, Putin's a madman, or Hamas is the sole cause, instead of really understanding the root causes and therefore the real solutions. So I'm very worried. We will have a new administration. There's always a chance that they will do better. I think it's our responsibility to tell them we do not want to perish in a nuclear war. We do not want more war. We want the wars to stop. We want diplomacy as solutions. We don't want fear mongering and we don't want warmongering. And that's true no matter who is president.
These words from Professor Sachs are truly incredible. It is our responsibility to let our leaders know that we don't want more confrontation and conflict. It's absolutely vital that the United States finds a way to peacefully coexist with Russia, with the Middle East, and most especially China. The United States will completely shift directions in January when Donald Trump assumes office. But last week, there was one final meeting between President Biden and President Xi at the G20 that gives us a preview of what the future US-China relationship will look like. Xi Jinping knows that Joe Biden is a lame duck president, but wanted to meet one final time to deliver an important speech where he outlined 7 lessons over the past 4 years that need to be remembered. I'll briefly summarize each of them for you and reveal the most important parts you need to remember for the future of US-China relations. Number 1, a new Cold War cannot and should not be fought. Containment of China is unwise, undesirable, and will not succeed. Number 2, words must be trustworthy and actions must be fruitful. If the US always says one thing and does another, it is very detrimental to America's image and damages mutual trust. Number 3, treat each other as equals. In exchanges between two major countries like China and the United States, neither side can reshape the other according to their own wishes, nor can they suppress the other based on a so-called position of strength. As you can see with these first 3 lessons, all of them relate to the United States government's stated goal of containing China's rise and maintaining US global hegemony. As Professor Sachs outlined in today's video, this is wrong and short-sighted thinking. The US has benefited tremendously from China's rise over the past 50 years, and we should be doing everything possible to build a stronger relationship with China. But the next part of Xi Jinping's speech is so crucial because it contains 4 red lines that the US government must not cross. Xi Jinping goes on to state, as 2 major countries, China and the United States, inevitably have some contradictions and differences, but they cannot harm each other's core interests. The Taiwan issue, democracy and human rights, development path, and development rights are China's 4 red lines, which cannot be challenged. These are the most important guardrails and safety nets for China-US relations. Once again, this is exactly what Professor Sachs spoke about in today's video. Taiwan remains the cornerstone of US-China relations, and Xi Jinping is taking this opportunity to meet with Biden to essentially outline what China wants to see change in this new US administration. The final 3 points from China's government are important and something I believe everyone can agree on. Number 5, under current circumstances, the common interest between China and the United States have not decreased, but increased. There should be more dialogue and cooperation. Number 6, the development of China-US relations should always focus on the well-being of both peoples. And finally, number 7, China and the United States should always consider the future and destiny of humanity and take responsibility for world peace. Everyone, as we come to the conclusion of today's video, I hope your takeaway is a better understanding of the importance of US-China relations. As I said at the beginning of today's video, the US and China have the most important geopolitical relationship in the world, and this relationship truly affects every other country in the planet. I want to thank Professor Sachs for his time, and make sure you click here to watch my other interviews with Professor Sachs, who in my opinion is one of the most rational and objective American voices speaking the truth about China and global conflicts around the world. As always, thank you for your incredible support, and I look forward to seeing you all in our next video soon.